It's November and the next generation of gaming is upon us. With a large amount of games coming out this month, is the Humble Choice worth your time? I'm Squashpickle and welcome to the November 2020 Humble Choice Review. Sit back, relax and enjoy, and let's take a look at the games on offer. This month we're back with just the one Humble original, and November's title comes in the form of Torii, a platform puzzler. It's an abstract game dealing with themes of grief and the understanding of one's emotions. The colourful visuals looked good, with nice lighting and atmospheric effects, but the main standout is the soundtrack, which reminded me of Studio Ghibli and Zelda. Unfortunately, the camera behaves weirdly, being oversensitive to the character's every move. A jump, for example, jolts the entire view upward, which just seemed wholly unneeded and jarring. Torii works well as a Humble original, with nice visuals and a great soundtrack, but hasn't done enough to make me want to return. Yakuza Kiwami 2 is the first game that I've played from the Yakuza series. As such, I can't comment too much on story, because even though there are cutscenes establishing the events of the first game, I needed to skip much of these in order to get to the gameplay. What I will say though is that the game is story rich, and even from the recap alone, the story from the original Kiwami seems detailed, with twists and turns aplenty, and I'm sure this will be the same for Kiwami 2. The game takes place in the streets of Japan, and I adored the environment, with the bustling streets and neon advertising. I'm aware that the Yakuza has a bunch of minigames, and although the game did not let me try them out, I would have loved to give them a go if given the chance. Combat was a real surprise, as the serious narrative made me expect something a little less arcadey. Nevertheless, I enjoyed the combat with its fast-paced combo moves, utilisation of nearby weapons, and the general over-the-top nature. It sure does juxtapose some of the more serious story elements. At a graveyard, there's a chance to remember events from Kiwami 1, so this may help newcomers get to grips, but I do think playing the first two games, Zero and Kiwami, would improve the experience. I will not be returning to Kiwami 2, instead I'll be on a lookout for a deal on the other games, so I can chronologically follow the story. Yakuza Kiwami 2 is an excellent game, and even with the small time I've played, this made me want to play more of the Yakuza games. It should be no surprise that Darksiders III is the third game in the Darksiders trilogy. As such, spoilers for the first two games will be unavoidably shared in this review. This is your warning to skip to the next video, but it is worth noting that I haven't played the first two games, so this is my first entry into the series. As my knowledge of the first two games is simply non-existent, I was left slightly confused at the beginning of the game. But after some exposition and research of the Steam page, I discovered that you play as Fury, one of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. The overall goal seems to be to dispose of the 7 deadly sins. Why? I'm not too sure, but they're sins, so they must be bad. The game takes place in a gorgeous environment where post-apocalyptic and fantasy combines. I enjoyed the world of Darksiders 3 and drew similarities to that of Destiny 2, despite the game still having its own identity. Fighting works on a hack and dash basis, and I chose to play on controller. Controls were responsive, with the main method of combat being a medium range whip. With different combinations of button presses, combos can be performed, and I greatly enjoyed the rapid, responsive combat. In terms of audio, the game feels wholly cinematic, with a grand soundtrack and movie quality voice acting. If you can't tell by now, I loved this game, and had to stop myself from playing longer than the allocated time. Even if you haven't played the first two, I can highly recommend Darksiders 3. Because even though some of the narrative's nuance may be lost, I can still follow the basic story. Imperator Rome Deluxe Edition is a grand strategy from Paradox Interactive. This review will be brief, because as someone with not much knowledge of the genre, I found the tutorials to be unwelcoming, overly complex, and just generally unhelpful. It's a shame, because Rome seems like a good place to house a historical grand strategy. There's a typical UI with lots of detail, but I wish the game taught how all this info could be decompressed. Instead, I was armed with a list of objectives and a "go on then, you're on your own" type of approach. I may be in the minority here, but a good tutorial should really nail in the basics, and I just didn't experience this with Imperator Rome. I suppose one good thing about this game is the music, with the strings and overall grandeur mixing with the gentle laps of the ocean. Unfortunately though, I can't recommend this to genre newcomers, and the mixed reviews on Steam show even experienced fans of Grand Strategy will most likely be disappointed. Crying Suns is a tactical roguelite set in space where the sacred energy source Omni has been shut down. It's up to you, the player, to restore order and reinstate the Omni. You'll know by now that I'm not too keen on roguelites, but every now and then something a little special like Void Bastards from July's bundle comes my way. Fortunately, Crying Suns is one such title, and I loved my time with this one. The UI is incredibly futuristic and sleek, and an absolute pleasure to navigate. Every now and then, moments of dialogue take place, and choices decide what the crew should do. Combat happens in a real-time, hexagonal basis, which can be paused to make tactical decisions, such as where combat drones and weapons should go. The story has been detailed, yet approachable so far, with some well-explored lore. Sometimes lore can get in the way of an understandable story, but this is not the case in Crying Suns. I'm also in love with the pixel art, and the foreground of the crew blends very well with the voids of space and detailed ships behind them. I usually don't return to roguelikes, but I will definitely see at least one run through. Darksburg is a multiplayer ARPG roguelike. First, let's get the pros dealt with. Visuals are good with a clay-like look, and there are designs to the character which I liked. Combat is simple to pick up, and I like the werewolf abilities that I had at my disposal, with my favourite being a spinning wheel that takes out enemies which dare got close to it. Additionally, all the mechanics work well with one another, and overall it's a solid multiplayer ARPG. But unfortunately, there are some issues, mostly thanks to its roguelike nature. I was able to play with Chris and Austin from Bombchew, and I originally ran into some ping-based stuttering, but this was resolved after playing for a while. The game is also ridiculously hard for an opening mission, and the three of us could not get to the first checkpoint without us all dying. I understand if a roguelite wants to be challenging, but it should at least let players learn the ropes before unleashing waves and waves of zombies. We were also unsure what progress carried over, as nothing was taken with us to our next run, assumedly because we couldn't reach the first checkpoint. I just feel disappointed because the battle mechanics and design are good, and if this was a linear campaign, I could see myself playing more of this, but at its challenging roguelike state, I'm in no mood to return. This next game, Little Misfortune, is hard to explain without giving too much away, so before I start the Little Misfortune review, I'll start by saying if you like games with something darker than meets the eye, then skip to the Darkwood review. Download the game, and I'm sure you'll have fun playing. For those still with us, the game makes you play as a young girl called Little Misfortune, and as the game suggests, misfortune haunts her life. It's a point and click, which is all presented in such a cheery and colourful exterior that it masks some of the darker, more shocking moments of the game. From what I've played so far, the game seems to be fairly linear, with simple object interaction and left to right traversal of the level, replacing complex details or fetch quests. The nature of my review means I haven't been able to discover much of the story, but I've kept details relatively vague of this review, so I'll not spoil any narrative details. I think I'll see this one through. Similar to Little Misfortune, Smile for Me has dark themes and secrets beneath the cheery surface. As such, this is your second warning to skip to the next game if you prefer to go into this game without prior knowledge. The Steam page actually gave away the style of the game for me with its psychological horror tag. Although I haven't played We Happy Few, I know a bit about that title's story, and it seems like Smile for Me shares similarities with Compulsion Games' survival horror. I played as a flower boy, delivering flowers to residents in order to cheer them up. After all, we can't have unhappy faces, can we? To do this, residents' requests must be fulfilled, and I had to return to my room for curfew, because did I mention that there's a real-life recordings of a puppet clown scattered into the mix? My least favourite part of Remedy's control was the Threshold Kids' puppets, and I experienced the same unsettlingness with Smile with Me. When I tried out what happens when you break curfew, I quickly closed the game, stepped away from my computer, and made some lunch. The eerie atmosphere excels in this game, but you should know enough about me now to understand that Squashpickle and scary do not go together. Darkwood is a top-down horror set in a fearful forest, but not a fundraiser. From the game design inputs, the game has some welcome features, such as simple inventory management and a cool little feature where a chest indicates whether it's already been searched. Much of the game is cloaked in darkness, and the direction of the player's position shows details such as a dead body that are not shown in the darkness. As with most horror games I play in these bundles, the games are good from a gameplay standpoint, but unfortunately the dark atmosphere prevents me from returning in the future, and I can certainly say that Darkwood's atmosphere is dark, dreary and depressing, and within the opening minutes you're asked to put a dog out of its misery. Reviews are good for this game, and it's held up to be a pretty solid survival horror so far. It's just not a horror game I'll be playing again. Tsioque, thank goodness the Steam description includes a pronunciation, is a hand-animated fantasy point-and-click. The game begins with an opening resembling that of a Disney movie, with gorgeous hand-drawn settings and incredibly good fantasy voice acting. With the departure of the Queen, an evil wizard takes siege and holds the princess captive. It's then up to the princess, of whom you play as, to escape prison and restore the kingdom. I absolutely admired this game, with its funny audio snippets from the fantasy guards, the detailed hand-drawn settings, and exceptional dynamic soundtrack. The soundtrack is of particular note, which genuinely would not sound out of place in a classic Disney movie. It caters to the player's every move, so for example, when I walked up a staircase, a piano changed key on each step. Puzzles so far do not seem to be that complex, but I'm okay with that. It's good to just sit back for a bit, take in a game's comedy, and see where it takes you. Steam reviews indicate that this one doesn't take too long to complete, at around 3 hours, so I'll certainly be seeing this one through, and I highly recommend that you don't overlook Tsioque. I'll be honest, I was hesitant going into this review because Rover Mechanic Simulator does not sound like a fun title. Fortunately, I was very pleasantly surprised, particularly as it's only in early access. Rovers needing repair come into the workshop and they must be fixed by printing 3D parts, removing faulty parts and updating drivers. It sounds pretty mundane, but with the in-game radio turned on and with easily understandable instructions, I actually found myself having fun. The great visuals help the game, and although I won't be spending too much time long term with this one, it's not as bad as I expected, and that's high praise indeed. Youropa is a puzzle platformer with gameplay that reminded me of Everborn from the March Humble Choice. You play as, well, you, and must solve puzzles in a gravity-defying world. The game opts for a chill approach to puzzles, with relaxing music and an overall calmness to the levels. The gravity puzzles have worked so far, with the ability to view a diorama of sorts of the level. For example, this perspective allows information such as a block pattern to be discovered and relayed to a different part of the level. I can imagine this one getting difficult with its abnormal world design, but there does seem to be a difficulty option in the setting, but I'm not entirely sure what it does. Visuals are also good, with a surprising level of realism despite the unrealistic blobbishness of the character. If you are looking for a puzzler this month, then Youropa may be worth a look. Townsmen, A Kingdom Rebuilt is a strategy town builder. If you've played a town builder before, then you've already played Townsmen. You construct buildings, conduct research, gather materials, and fulfill citizens' demands. That's not to say this game is terrible, but I didn't encounter any gameplay that made Townsmen stand out from other games of the genre. One such quest was to produce bread by hiring workers to construct a windmill before building a shiny new bakery for the town. Everything in this quest worked, but it's a mission I've done in previous town builders, which I already own. I won't be advising you to avoid this game at all costs, because it's not terrible, it just needs some bigger ideas, and a little more flair to the gameplay. So there are my thoughts on this month's games. Once again, Classic and Premium subs get all 12 choices, so there's no need for me to share what to drop. Overall, the games in this bundle were of a pretty high standard. I had low expectations for Townsmen and Rover Mechanic Simulator, but even they surprised me. There's certainly no fantasy blacksmith or shopkeeps in this bundle. We've got a few more horror titles this month, and I feel like they may have been better suited in October. Overall though, there's some solid titles such as Darksiders III, Tsioque and Crying Sons, which I'll definitely return to. There's also a few others that I enjoyed, and will return to once I get the chance, but to have 3 games that I'm very eager to play makes this bundle a very easy recommendation. If you've kept to this point of the video, then thanks again for the support. You'll find a Patreon link in the description if you'd like to help financially, but there's no pressure to do this. Your watch time is already helping. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.